The freezing rain pelted down on Winifred Langley's trembling shoulders as she huddled beneath the old stone bridge, her thin shawl providing little protection against the harsh autumn chill of 1873. Just 3 weeks a widow, and here she was, homeless and starving in the unforgiving Colorado territory, miles from the nearest town and farther still from anyone who might remember her name. The fever that had taken William left her with nothing but debts and broken promises. The bank had seized their small homestead before her husband's body was even cold in the ground. With nowhere to go and no family to turn to, Winifred had started walking, hoping to reach her cousin in Denver before winter truly set in. But the early storm had caught her unprepared, forcing her to seek shelter beneath this lonely bridge spanning Miller's Creek. Just until morning, she whispered to herself, teeth chattering as she pulled her threadbare carpet bag closer, the sum total of her worldly possessions now fitting in a single piece of luggage. The rain will stop by morning. She closed her eyes, trying to remember the warmth of her kitchen stove, the comfort of the small home she had made with William. They had been happy despite his gambling, despite the promises he couldn't keep. Despite everything, they had loved each other. Now she was 24, alone, and facing a night that might well be her last if the temperature continued to drop. The sound of hoofbeats was almost lost in the drumming of the rain on the stones above, but Winifred's eyes flew open when she realized someone was approaching. Fear and hope warred within her, fear of who might find a woman alone on a stormy night, hope that perhaps she might not die beneath this bridge after all. The silhouette that appeared at the edge of her meager shelter was tall and broad-shouldered, the brim of a cowboy hat dripping with rainwater. The man dismounted, leading his horse under the bridge, and Winifred pressed herself further back against the cold stone wall. "Madam," his voice was deep, cautious. "Are you hurt?" Winifred swallowed hard. "No, sir, just taking shelter from the storm." The man crouched down, keeping a respectful distance, and now Winifred could see his face in the dim light. He was younger than she had first thought, perhaps 30, with a strong jaw shadowed with several days' worth of beard. His eyes were kind if wary. "Name's Bryce Jameson. I've got a cabin about 2 miles up the creek. Not much, but it's dry and there's a fire." He glanced at her carpet bag, then back at her face. "You shouldn't be out here alone, not in this weather." "I'm quite all right," Winifred said automatically, though her shivering betrayed the lie. Pride was about all she had left, and she clung to it fiercely. Bryce Jameson sighed, pushing his hat back slightly. "Madam, I don't mean to be forward, but you look half frozen. I'm offering you shelter for the night, nothing more. You can have the cabin to yourself if you prefer." "I'll sleep in the lean-to with the horse." A particularly violent shiver racked Winifred's body, and she realized the foolishness of refusing. "I'm Winifred Langley, Mrs. Winifred Langley," she added, though the title felt hollow now. "My husband passed 3 weeks ago." Something softened in the cowboy's eyes. "I'm sorry for your loss, Mrs. Langley. Please let me help you." Before she could formulate another protest, he had removed his heavy canvas duster and draped it around her shoulders. The sudden warmth was shocking, and tears sprang to her eyes unbidden. "Thank you," she whispered. "Can you stand?" he asked. Winifred tried, but her legs had grown stiff and numb from hours of sitting on the cold, damp ground. She stumbled, and without hesitation, Bryce caught her arm to steady her. "I apologize, but—" Before she could object, he had scooped her into his arms, one arm behind her back and the other beneath her knees. "I'll come back for your bag. Sampson can carry us both." The horse, a sturdy buckskin gelding, stood patiently as Bryce somehow managed to mount while still holding Winifred securely against his chest. She knew she should protest this impropriety, but the warmth of his body and the solid strength of his arms made her protests die in her throat. "Hold tight," he murmured, and then they were moving, the horse picking its way carefully along the creek bank in the fading light. Winifred closed her eyes, too exhausted and cold to fear what might await her at the stranger's cabin. If this man meant her harm, she reasoned, he would have done so already. and if he was offering genuine kindness. Well, it had been so long since anyone had shown her kindness that she hardly remembered how to accept it. The ride seemed both endless and over in an instant. Winifred must have dozed against Bryce's chest because the next thing she knew, they were stopping before a small log cabin nestled against the side of a hill, a thin wisp of smoke curling from its stone chimney. "Someone's here?" she asked, confused. "No, madam. I keep a banked fire when I'm gone for the day. Never know when you might need to come home to warmth." He dismounted carefully, still holding her, and carried her to the cabin door. Somehow, he managed to work the latch without putting her down, pushing the door open with his foot. The interior was simple but neat: a table with 2 chairs, a cast-iron cookstove, some shelves with provisions, and a narrow bed built into one wall. A bearskin rug covered part of the plank floor, and a rocking chair sat beside the stone fireplace where embers glowed faintly. Bryce carried her directly to the chair closest to the fireplace and set her down gently. "I'll get that fire going proper and fetch your bag," he said, already kneeling to add wood to the embers. Winifred watched as he coaxed the fire to life with practiced efficiency, the warmth gradually beginning to reach her. When the flames were crackling cheerfully, he straightened. "I'll be right back. Don't you worry about a thing, Mrs. Langley." True to his word, he returned minutes later with her carpet bag and a saddle bag from his horse. He set her belongings beside her chair and moved to the stove, working the damper and adding wood. "I've got some stew left from yesterday," he said, his back to her as he worked. "And coffee, if you'd like." "That's very kind," Winifred managed, her voice still shaky from cold and exhaustion. "Not at all, madam, just being neighborly." He glanced over his shoulder at her. "If you'd like to change into something dry, I can step outside." Winifred realized with embarrassment that her dress was soaked through, clinging to her in a most improper way. "Yes, thank you, just for a moment." When he had closed the door behind him, she hurriedly opened her carpet bag and pulled out her second dress, nearly as worn as the one she wore, but blessedly dry. She changed as quickly as her stiff fingers would allow, grateful for the fire's warmth. She had just finished buttoning the bodice when Bryce knocked softly. "Decent," he called. "Yes, thank you." He entered, carrying an armload of firewood which he stacked beside the hearth. Then he busied himself at the stove, stirring something in a pot and setting water to boil for coffee. "May I ask where you're headed, Mrs. Langley?" he asked after a while, his tone conversational rather than prying. "Denver," she replied. "I have a cousin there who might take me in until I can find work." He nodded, considering. "That's still a good 4 days' ride from here, and that's in fair weather." He glanced toward the window, where rain continued to lash against the glass. "This storm's set to last at least another day or 2, according to my knee." He rubbed his right leg absently. "Old injury." "Better than any barometer." "I can't impose on you for days," Winifred protested. "You've already been more than kind." Bryce shrugged, spooning stew into a bowl. "It's no imposition. I've been living alone out here for 5 years now. Company's welcome." He handed her the bowl and a spoon. "Especially company that doesn't ask me to round up strays in a downpour." The stew was simple venison, potatoes, carrots, and wild onions, but to Winifred, who hadn't eaten a proper meal in days, it was ambrosia. She tried to eat slowly, with dignity, but hunger won out, and she found herself scraping the bowl clean in minutes. "There's more," Bryce said, already refilling it before she could refuse. "Thank you." She accepted the second helping with less hesitation. "You're very kind, Mr. Jameson." "Bryce, please." He settled into the other chair with his own bowl. "And it's no kindness to share what I have plenty of." They ate in companionable silence for a while, the only sounds the crackling of the fire and the storm raging outside. When they had finished, Bryce made coffee and handed her a steaming mug. "If you don't mind my asking," he said carefully, "how did you come to be under that bridge?" Winifred stared into her coffee, weighing how much to share with this stranger who had shown her nothing but kindness. "My husband died of fever," she began. "We had a small homestead near Boulder, William." He had debts I didn't know about. The bank foreclosed almost immediately. She swallowed hard. I had nowhere to go. Bryce's expression darkened. Boulder National Bank, she nodded, surprised. Yes. How did you know? Bartholomew Crick. Bryce practically spat the name. Man's been forcing folks off their land up and down the territory, always legal, always heartless. He shook his head. I'm sorry, Mrs. Langley, that man's ruined more lives than the cholera. Winifred, she said quietly. If I'm to call you Bryce, then please call me Winifred. He nodded, a small smile softening his features. Winifred, then. The coffee warmed her from within as the fire warmed her from without. For the first time in weeks, Winifred felt the iron band of fear around her chest begin to loosen, if only slightly. You'll stay until the storm passes, Bryce said, and it wasn't a question. After that, if you still wish to go to Denver, I can take you as far as Central City. I have business there next week anyway. I couldn't ask. You didn't ask. I offered. His tone was firm but kind. These mountains are no place for anyone to travel alone, especially not now with winter coming on. Winifred wanted to protest further, to insist she could make her own way, but exhaustion was overtaking her rapidly now that she was warm and fed. She swayed slightly in her chair. You need rest, Bryce said, standing. Take the bed. I've got blankets for the floor. I couldn't put you out of your bed, she objected weakly. You're not putting me out of anything. I sleep on the trail half the time anyway. He was already pulling blankets from a trunk at the foot of the bed. Please, Winifred, you're dead on your feet. Too tired to argue further, she nodded. Thank you for everything. Get some rest. Things always look clearer in the morning. As Winifred settled into the narrow but comfortable bed, she watched through half-closed eyes as Bryce made a pallet for himself near the fire. The last thing she saw before sleep claimed her was the cowboy adding another log to the flames, his face thoughtful in the golden light. Morning came with the soft sounds of movement, the clink of a coffee pot, the rustle of kindling being added to the fire. Winifred opened her eyes to find sunlight streaming through the cabin's single window, illuminating dust motes that danced in the air. For a moment she was disoriented, but then memory returned: the bridge, the rain, the kind cowboy who had carried her to safety. Bryce was at the stove, his back to her, frying something that smelled heavenly. He must have sensed her wakefulness because he turned, a spatula in hand. Good morning, he said. How are you feeling? Winifred sat up, smoothing her hair self-consciously. Much better, thank you. I'm sorry to have slept so late. It's barely past dawn, he assured her, and you needed the rest, he gestured with the spatula. Breakfast is nearly ready if you're hungry. Her stomach growled in response, and she blushed. It seems I am. Wash basins over there if you want to freshen up, he said, nodding toward a stand in the corner. Take your time, these biscuits need a few more minutes anyway. Grateful for the chance to make herself presentable, Winifred crossed to the wash basin. The water was cool but clean, and she used it to wash her face and hands, then did her best to tidy her hair into a simple knot at the nape of her neck. Without a mirror, she couldn't be sure of the results, but it was better than nothing. When she turned back to the room, Bryce had set the table with 2 plates of food: fried potatoes, bacon, and golden biscuits with a jar of honey beside them. It's not fancy, he said, pulling out a chair for her, but it'll keep you going. It looks wonderful, Winifred said sincerely, taking the offered seat. I don't know how to thank you for all this. Bryce settled across from her, passing the honey. No thanks needed. I couldn't just leave you out there. They ate in comfortable silence for a few minutes, the food as delicious as it had smelled. Through the window, Winifred could see that the rain had indeed stopped, though the sky remained overcast and threatening. Storm's not done yet, Bryce commented, following her gaze. We've got a lull, but there's more coming. I need to check on my stock and bring in more firewood before it starts up again. He hesitated. Will you be all right here alone for a bit? Of course, Winifred said. Please don't let me keep you from your work. He nodded, finishing his coffee. I won't be far. Cabin's yours while I'm gone. Rest, look around, whatever you need. After he had donned his coat and hat and gone out, Winifred sat for a moment, simply absorbing the quiet and the lingering warmth of the fire. Then, feeling she should make herself useful, she began to clear the breakfast dishes. The cabin was small but efficiently arranged, and she soon found a wash basin for the dishes. As she worked, she took in more details of her surroundings. Bryce Jameson clearly lived simply, but not primitively. There were books on a shelf, novels, poetry, practical guides to ranching and hunting. A guitar leaned in one corner. The furniture was handmade but crafted with care. Everything was clean and in its place. It was, she realized, a home. Not just a shelter, but a place someone had put thought and care into making comfortable. The realization made her chest ache with a sudden, sharp longing for what she had lost. By the time Bryce returned, arms laden with firewood, Winifred had washed the dishes, swept the floor, and was sitting in the rocking chair by the fire, one of his books, a volume of Tennyson's poetry, open in her lap. He paused in the doorway, surprise evident on his face. "You didn't have to clean up," he said, setting the wood beside the fireplace. "I wanted to," she replied. "It seemed the least I could do." She closed the book, suddenly worried she had overstepped. "I hope you don't mind that I looked at your books." "Not at all." He hung his hat on a peg by the door. "That's one of my favorites, actually. My mother loved Tennyson." "Mine as well," Winifred said, her fingers tracing the worn leather cover. "She used to read to me in the evenings." A moment of understanding passed between them, the shared experience of loss, of memories treasured and painful at once. "The storm's coming back," Bryce said, breaking the silence. "I've got the stock sheltered and enough wood to last us a few days if needed." He removed his coat, hanging it beside his hat. "I hope you don't mind being stuck here a while longer." "Not at all," Winifred said, and was surprised to realize she meant it. There was something comforting about this cabin, about Bryce's quiet presence. For the first time since William's death, she felt safe. The day passed peacefully. Bryce mended a bridle while Winifred darned a pair of his socks she'd noticed needed repair. They talked intermittently about books they had read, places they had seen. Carefully, they skirted the deeper pains of their pasts, each sensing the other's reluctance to delve too deeply too quickly. By evening, the storm had returned in full force, rain hammering against the roof and wind howling around the cabin's sturdy walls. Bryce cooked a simple dinner of beans, bacon, and cornbread, and they ate by the fire's light, the lamp oil being precious and in limited supply. "How long have you lived here?" Winifred asked as they finished their meal. 5 years, Bryce replied. "Came west after the war. Needed open space and quiet after all that." He didn't elaborate on which side he had fought for, and Winifred didn't ask. Those wounds were still too fresh for many, regardless of allegiance. "And you ranch, small scale. Mostly cattle, a few horses, enough to get by." He leaned back in his chair. "What about you? Before Boulder, where was home?" "Ohio," she said. "My father was a schoolteacher. When he died, there wasn't much to keep me there. I answered an advertisement, a man seeking a bride in the Colorado Territory." She smiled faintly at the memory. William was a dreamer, always chasing the next big strike, the next opportunity. He was kind, though, and he loved me in his way. "I'm sorry you lost him," Bryce said softly. Winifred nodded, unexpected tears pricking at her eyes. "Thank you, I'm sorry too. Sorry he left me with nothing but debts and memories." Bryce was quiet for a long moment. "My wife died," he said finally. "Elizabeth, 4 years ago, childbirth." His voice was steady but distant, as if he were reciting facts about someone else's life. "The baby too, a boy. Oh, Bryce. I'm so sorry." Winifred reached across the small space between them, placing her hand on his arm before she could think better of it. He looked down at her hand, then covered it with his own. "Thank you," he said simply. They sat like that for a long moment, connected in shared grief, the fire crackling beside them and the storm raging outside. The next morning dawned clear and cold, the storm having blown itself out during the night. Winifred woke to find Bryce already gone. A note on the table informing her he had gone to check on a calf born the previous day and would return by mid-morning. She used the time alone to wash her spare dress and undergarments, hanging them near the fire to dry. Then she set about making a more substantial breakfast than they had eaten the day before, using ingredients she found in Bryce's well-organized pantry. When he returned, stamping snow from his boots for the rain had turned to snow overnight at the higher elevation, he stopped short at the sight and smell of flapjacks cooking on his stove. "You didn't have to cook," he said, though his expression was pleased. "I wanted to," Winifred replied, flipping a flapjack with practiced ease. "You've been so kind, it's the least I can do." They ate together, and Bryce pronounced the flapjacks the best he'd had since his mother's. The compliment warmed Winifred more than she cared to admit. After breakfast, Bryce suggested they ride out to check on the rest of his stock. "The snow's not deep," he said, "and Sampson can carry us both again if you don't mind sharing a saddle." The idea of being so close to him again sent a flutter through Winifred's stomach that she chose not to examine too closely. "I don't mind," she said. "I'd like to see more of your ranch." The day was crisp and bright, the snow a thin blanket over the landscape that was already melting where the sun touched it. Seated behind Bryce on Sampson, her arms encircling his waist for balance, Winifred found herself enjoying the ride despite the impropriety of their position. Bryce's ranch was modest but well-maintained, a small herd of cattle, a few horses, a chicken coop, and a sturdy barn. As they rode, he pointed out landmarks and told her stories of the area, of the Ute who had once camped along the creek, of the first hard winter he had spent in the cabin. "It's beautiful," Winifred said as they paused on a rise overlooking the valley. "So peaceful. It can be hard," Bryce admitted. "Winters are long and there's always more work than hands to do it. But yes, it's beautiful." They returned to the cabin as the sun was beginning to lower, casting long shadows across the snow. The ride had given Winifred a healthy appetite, and she was grateful for the venison stew Bryce prepared for their evening meal. As they sat by the fire afterward, Bryce surprised her by taking up his guitar. "Do you mind?" he asked, fingers already tuning the strings. "Not at all. I'd love to hear you play." His playing was skilled, his voice deep and resonant as he sang old ballads and folk songs. Winifred found herself joining in on the ones she knew, their voices blending in the warm cabin air. When he finished a particularly moving rendition of Barbara Allen, Winifred wiped away a tear. "My father used to sing that," she said. "You play beautifully." "Thank you," Bryce said, setting the guitar aside. Music was one of the few comforts during the war. A man with a guitar or fiddle was always welcome around the campfire, no matter which side you fought for. "Which side did you fight for?" Winifred asked, then immediately regretted the question. "I'm sorry, that's too personal." "No, it's all right." Bryce stared into the fire. "I fought for the Union. My family had no slaves, saw no reason why any man should own another." He sighed. "But I had friends who wore gray. Good men who believed they were fighting for their homes, their way of life. War's never as simple as the politicians make it sound." Winifred nodded. "My brother fought for the Union as well. He didn't come home." "I'm sorry," Bryce said softly. "It was a long time ago now," Winifred said, though the pain had never truly faded. 8 years, almost 9. Thomas would have been 30 this year. They sat in silence for a while, each lost in memories. Finally, Bryce spoke again. "Will your cousin in Denver be expecting you?" Winifred shook her head. "No, I haven't seen Margaret in years, not since before she married and moved west. I'm not even certain she's still there. It was just the only place I could think to go." Bryce nodded, considering. "The pass to Central City will be difficult now with the snow. It might be a week or more before it's safe to travel." "I understand," Winifred said. "I don't wish to impose, but if I could stay until then, you're welcome here as long as you need," Bryce interrupted. "Truly, Winifred, you're not imposing." The sincerity in his voice touched her deeply. "Thank you," she whispered. That night, as she lay in his bed while he slept near the fire, Winifred found herself wondering what it would be like to stay here, in this peaceful valley with this kind man. The thought should have scandalized her, a widow of less than a month considering such things, but instead, it filled her with a warm glow of possibility that followed her into her dreams. The days that followed fell into a comfortable rhythm. Winifred and Bryce shared the work of the cabin and the small ranch. She cooked and mended, gathered eggs from the chickens, and helped tend the garden that supplied much of their food. He hunted, cared for the livestock, and made repairs to the barn and fences damaged in the storm. In the evenings, they read aloud to each other from Bryce's small library, played cards, or simply talked. Winifred learned that Bryce had been a schoolteacher before the war, like her father, and had come west hoping to leave the memories of battle behind. He learned that she had once dreamed of being a writer, filling journals with stories and poems until the practical demands of life had pushed those dreams aside. "You should write again," he told her one evening as they sat by the fire. "You have a gift with words." "Perhaps someday," she said, though the idea seemed impossibly distant. A week passed, then another. The weather improved, the trails dried, and the pass to Central City would soon be passable. Yet neither of them mentioned Winifred's departure. It was as if they had entered into an unspoken agreement to live in this suspended moment, neither past nor future intruding on their present contentment. But reality could not be held at bay forever. On a clear morning in early October, Bryce returned from checking his traps with news that travelers had been seen on the main trail. "The stage should be running again," he said, not quite meeting Winifred's eyes. "If you still want to go to Denver, I could take you to the station tomorrow." Winifred felt her heart sink. "Yes, I suppose I should be moving on." The day seemed suddenly darker, the cabin colder despite the sunshine streaming through the window. They went about their tasks with subdued efficiency, the easy companionship of recent weeks strained by the weight of impending separation. That evening, as they sat at the table over a meal neither had much appetite for, Bryce finally broke the uncomfortable silence. "Winifred," he began, then hesitated. "I know this may be too soon, and I'll understand if you say no, but I don't want you to go." She looked up sharply, her heart suddenly racing. "What do you mean?" Bryce took a deep breath. "I mean that these weeks with you have been the happiest I've known since Elizabeth died. I mean that the thought of this cabin without you in it feels wrong now." He reached across the table, his hand stopping just short of touching hers. "I'm not asking for promises. I know you're still grieving William, but if you wanted to stay just for a while longer." "Yes," Winifred said, the word escaping before she could measure it. "Yes, I'd like to stay." The smile that broke across Bryce's face was like sunrise after a long night. Slowly, giving her every chance to pull away, he reached for her hand. His palm was warm and calloused against hers, the touch sending a current of awareness through her that left her breathless. "Thank you," he said simply. That night, for the first time, Bryce did not make his pallet by the fire. Instead, he slept outside in the lean-to, giving Winifred complete privacy in the cabin. The gesture touched her deeply, a sign of his respect, his determination not to rush or pressure her in any way. As October gave way to November, their relationship evolved with cautious tenderness. Bryce built a second bed that he installed in a curtained-off corner of the cabin, ensuring Winifred had her own space while allowing them to maintain propriety as they continued to live under the same roof. They worked side by side during the days, preparing for the winter ahead. Bryce taught Winifred to shoot, insisting she needed to be able to protect herself and hunt if necessary. She proved a quick study, much to his admiration. "You're a natural," he said, as she brought down a rabbit at 30 paces. "I had a good teacher," she replied, the pride in his eyes warming her more than any compliment could have. In the evenings, they sat before the fire, sometimes reading, sometimes talking, sometimes simply enjoying the comfortable silence between them. Occasionally, their hands would meet, fingers entwining with increasing confidence. Once, as she passed him a cup of coffee, their fingers brushed and Bryce caught her hand, raised it to his lips, and pressed a gentle kiss to her knuckles. The simple gesture left Winifred flushed and flustered for hours afterward. Winter arrived with a vengeance in early December, a blizzard howling around the cabin for 3 days straight. Confined indoors by the storm, they found new ways to pass the time. Bryce taught Winifred to play chess on a board he had carved years before. She taught him to bake bread using her mother's recipe, laughing at his flour-covered hands and serious concentration. On the evening of the third day, as the storm finally began to abate, they sat side by side on a blanket before the fire, closer than they had ever allowed themselves to be. "I never thought I could feel this way again," Bryce said softly, his eyes on the flames. "After Elizabeth. I thought that part of me had died with her." Winifred nodded, understanding completely. "I felt the same after William. Even though our marriage wasn't perfect, he was my husband. I couldn't imagine." She trailed off, unable to find the right words. "Caring for someone else," Bryce finished for her. "Wanting a future with someone else." "Yes," she whispered slowly, giving her every opportunity to move away. Bryce turned toward her. His hand came up to cup her cheek, his touch feather-light. "Winifred," he murmured, her name a question and a plea. She answered by leaning into his touch, her eyes closing briefly at the warmth of his palm against her skin. When she opened them again, Bryce was closer, his gaze dropping to her lips with unmistakable intent. "May I?" he asked, his voice rough with emotion. In response, Winifred closed the distance between them, pressing her lips to his in a kiss that began as gentle as a whisper, but quickly deepened into something more urgent, more needy. Bryce's arms went around her, drawing her closer, and she melted against him. Months of loneliness and longing crystallizing into this single, perfect moment of connection. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Bryce rested his forehead against hers. "I think I'm falling in love with you," he confessed. "I know it's too soon," but Winifred silenced him with another quick kiss. "It doesn't feel too soon," she said. "Not to me." They stayed by the fire late into the night, talking and kissing and simply holding each other, relearning the comfort of human touch, the joy of being truly seen by another person. When exhaustion finally claimed them, they fell asleep still on the blanket before the fire, Winifred's head on Bryce's chest, his arm protectively around her shoulders. Christmas approached, bringing with it a clarity of feeling that could no longer be denied. One evening, as they decorated the cabin with pine boughs and berries Bryce had collected, he suddenly set down the branch he was holding and took both of Winifred's hands in his. "I love you," he said simply. "I know we haven't known each other long, but I love you, Winifred Langley. I want to build a life with you if you'll have me." Tears sprang to Winifred's eyes. "I love you too," she said, her voice thick with emotion, "more than I thought possible." Bryce dropped to one knee, still holding her hands. "Then marry me, not right away, not until you're ready. But say you'll be my wife someday." "Yes," Winifred said without hesitation. "Yes, I'll marry you, Bryce Jameson." His smile was radiant as he rose and pulled her into his arms, kissing her with a passion that left her breathless and clinging to his shoulders for support. They were married on New Year's Day, 1874, in the small church in Central City. The preacher's wife served as witness, along with the town doctor who had become a friend to Bryce over the years. Winifred wore a new dress of deep blue wool that Bryce had insisted on buying her as a Christmas gift, and he wore his best shirt and the string tie she had made for him from a length of black silk. The ceremony was simple, the words ancient and binding. When the preacher pronounced them man and wife, Bryce kissed Winifred with such tenderness that tears sprang to her eyes once more. "My wife," he whispered against her lips. "My beautiful wife." They spent their wedding night at the hotel in Central City, a luxury neither had experienced in years. The privacy of the room, the clean sheets on the wide bed, the knowledge that they were now husband and wife in the eyes of God and man, all combined to make their first night together a sacred experience neither would ever forget. In the soft lamplight, they explored each other with reverent hands and whispered words of love. Bryce was gentle, patient, attentive to Winifred's every response. And Winifred, who had never known such complete surrender could exist within such complete safety, gave herself to him wholly, finding in his arms a passion she had never dreamed possible. Afterward, as they lay tangled in the sheets and each other, Bryce traced lazy patterns on Winifred's bare shoulder. "Happy?" he asked. "Completely," she sighed, nestling closer to his warmth. "And you, more than I ever thought possible." He pressed a kiss to her forehead. "I never expected to find you, Winifred Jameson, never expected to love again, to hope again." "Nor I," she admitted. "When William died, I thought my life was over. Now I know it was just beginning." She raised herself on one elbow to look down at him, her hair falling like a curtain around them. "Thank you for finding me under that bridge." Bryce reached up to tuck a strand of hair behind her ear. "Thank you for letting me carry you home." They returned to the ranch 2 days later, riding double on Samson as they had that first day. But now, with Winifred's arms wrapped confidently around her husband's waist, her cheek pressed against his back. The cabin that had once been Bryce's alone was now theirs together, a home they would continue to build with love and hard work. Spring came early that year, as if nature itself celebrated their union. Winifred planted an expanded garden, adding flowers among the vegetables, marigolds to keep pests away, sunflowers for their cheerful faces, and roses because Bryce said they reminded him of her cheeks when she blushed. They added a room to the cabin, Bryce working alongside neighbors who came to help raise the walls. By summer, the small ranch was transformed: curtains at the windows, a proper fence around the garden to keep deer out, a rocking chair on the porch where they sat in the evenings to watch the sunset. In late August, as they harvested the first ripe tomatoes from the garden, Winifred shared news that made Bryce drop his basket and sweep her into his arms, spinning her around until she was dizzy with laughter. "Careful," she cautioned, still laughing. "I'm carrying precious cargo." "A baby," he murmured in awe, setting her gently on her feet but keeping his hands on her waist. "Our baby." The fear that had shadowed him since Elizabeth's death, that he might lose Winifred the same way, was there in his eyes, but it was overshadowed by joy and determination. "We'll go to Denver," he said decisively. "For the birth, the best doctor, the best care." Winifred placed her hand over his where it rested on her still flat stomach. "We have months yet to plan," she reminded him, "and I'm strong, Bryce, healthy." "I know," he said, bending to kiss her softly. "But I'm taking no chances with you, my love, with either of you." As autumn painted the valley in golds and reds, Winifred's body changed, her dresses needing to be let out, her face glowing with the inner light of creation. Bryce watched over her with devoted attention, insisting she rest when she tried to do too much, reading to her in the evenings as she knitted tiny garments for the child growing within her. They spent Christmas at home, exchanging simple gifts before the fire: a new journal and pen for Winifred, a handcrafted pipe for Bryce. But their greatest gift was the flutter of movement Bryce felt when he placed his hand on Winifred's rounded belly, the first tangible sign of the new life they had created together. "Hello, little one," he whispered, pressing his ear to Winifred's stomach. "Your mama and papa can't wait to meet you." Winifred ran her fingers through Bryce's hair, her heart so full she thought it might burst. From the depths of despair beneath that bridge to this moment of perfect happiness, it seemed impossible that so much could change in the span of a year. Yet here she was, loved and loving, building a family with a man who had carried her not just to safety that stormy night, but into a future brighter than any she could have imagined. In early February of 1875, with snow blanketing the valley once more, they made the journey to Denver as planned. Bryce had arranged everything: a comfortable room in the home of a doctor's widow who took in expectant mothers, the services of the city's most respected physician, a nurse to attend Winifred day and night if needed. "You're fussing too much," Winifred told him affectionately as he settled her into the well-appointed room. "Never," he said, pressing a kiss to her forehead. "Not where you're concerned. The baby, a girl with Bryce's dark hair and Winifred's blue eyes, arrived on a clear, cold morning in late February after a labor that was long but ultimately uncomplicated. When the doctor placed the squalling infant in Bryce's arms, tears streamed unashamedly down his face. "She's perfect," he whispered, bringing the child to Winifred, "just like her mother." They named her Elizabeth Margaret Elizabeth for Bryce's first wife, a gesture of healing and remembrance that touched him deeply, and Margaret for Winifred's cousin who, as it turned out, did still live in Denver and had been overjoyed to reconnect with her long-lost relative. The new family remained in Denver until spring made travel safer, giving Winifred time to recover fully and baby Elizabeth time to grow strong. When they finally returned to the ranch, it was to find that neighbors had prepared a cradle handcrafted from pine, a quilt stitched by the women of nearby homesteads, and the cabin cleaned and ready for their return. "Welcome home, Mrs. Jameson," Bryce said, carrying Winifred and the baby over the threshold just as he had carried Winifred alone all those months before. The years that followed brought changes both expected and surprising. The small ranch prospered under their joint care, expanding gradually to include more cattle, better horses, even a few sheep whose wool Winifred spun and wove during the winter months. Elizabeth grew from a solemn baby into a laughing toddler who followed her father everywhere, learning the names of plants and animals, developing his love of music and her mother's love of stories. When she was 3, a brother joined the family, Thomas William, named for Winifred's brother and her first husband, another act of healing that honored the past while embracing the future. 2 years later, twin girls Sarah and Jane completed their family, bringing joyful chaos to the once quiet cabin that had now expanded to a proper farmhouse with rooms for each child, and a study where Winifred wrote in the evenings after the children were asleep. For to everyone's surprise, especially her own, Winifred had indeed returned to writing. It began with simple stories for Elizabeth, tales of brave girls and kind animals that Bryce encouraged her to write down. From there, she progressed to articles for the territorial newspaper, accounts of frontier life that found an eager audience back east. By the time the twins were toddlers, Winifred had published a novel, a romance set during the Civil War that drew on her own experiences and observations. The book's success brought offers from publishers for more stories, and a second career flourished alongside her roles as wife, mother, and rancher. Bryce supported her writing wholeheartedly, building her a desk by the bedroom window where she could see the mountains while she worked, taking the children on long rides when she needed quiet to finish a chapter. His pride in her accomplishments was boundless, his love unwavering. "Did you ever imagine this?" Winifred asked one evening as they sat on the porch watching their children play in the yard. Elizabeth, now 10, was teaching 7-year-old Thomas to lasso a fence post while the 5-year-old twins chased butterflies through the tall grass. "No," Bryce admitted, his arm around her shoulders. "After Elizabeth died, I thought my life would always be solitary. I never imagined so much joy, so much love." He pressed a kiss to her temple. "What about you? That night under the bridge, did you ever imagine finding this?" Winifred leaned into his embrace, watching as Thomas finally succeeded in looping his small lasso around the post, his whoop of triumph making the twins stop their butterfly chase to applaud. "Never," she said softly. "I was just trying to survive until morning." "I never dreamed I was waiting for you." Bryce's arm tightened around her. "Thank God I found you," he murmured against her hair. "Thank God you carried me home," she replied, turning to meet his lips in a kiss as sweet and promising as the first they had shared by the fireside years before. As the sun set behind the mountains, painting the sky in shades of gold and rose, the Jameson family gathered on the porch of the home they had built together. Bryce with his guitar, Winifred with the twins on her lap, Elizabeth and Thomas leaning against their parents' knees. Their voices rose in harmony, singing the old songs, creating new memories. Their love a beacon in the wilderness, a light kindled that stormy night when a kind cowboy carried a desperate widow to safety, and lit a fire that would warm them both for all the days of their lives.